Now, the second focus on the show today, a look at news of variants that are emerging in different parts of the world. Now, a variant of interest, C.1.2, was detected in South Africa earlier and now in many other countries as well. And a new study has found that this variant could be more transmissible and evade protection provided by vaccines. So, a worry there. And a new sublineage of the Delta variant known as AY1.12 has been detected in some states in India and in Israel as well. In fact, it's seen that this variant, variant of the Delta variant is something that is pushing the surge in cases in Israel. And now there's news from the UK where there are fears that after a big music festival gathering that took place there, it could have led to the emergence of a new Delta strain, and that's being investigated as infection has spread among those who attended this music festival. Well, to talk more about all this, we're joined by Professor Dipti Gurdasani, Senior Lecturer, Queen Mary University of London. Thank you so much for joining us. And Professor, if you could talk firstly about this news. I think it's just come in one or two places about this music festival where over 50,000 people attended, and now it's being found that a lot of them have been infected with what could possibly be a new variant of the Delta variant.
So we have heard this from some news outlets, but our public health body, which is Public Health England, hasn't confirmed this. So we need to sort of wait on reports for that. Having said that, we've had several new mutations emerge on a background of Delta. So Delta is constantly evolving when there's transmission. And we've had pretty high transmission in England for long periods of time. And we have seen several new mutations emerge, several different strains. So we have 12 strains or sublineages of Delta within the UK, which are being monitored. And we haven't noticed any particular one, increase in frequency in a sort of consistent way, like, for example, Israel has reported. But it's something that's being monitored at the moment. But we need to remember these viruses, if they allow to transmit, are constantly evolving. There are concerning mutations that are developing on this background. And as we see with the C.1.2 sublineage, many of these mutations are the same mutations that have been associated either with increased transmissibility in other strains or escape from vaccines or immunity in other strains. So we have to keep an eye on this. And as long as we allow the virus to evolve through transmission, we will see new variants emerging. The only way to stop this is actually to control transmission.
Right, Professor. Earlier at the start of the pandemic, we all talked about herd immunity, and if we cover 60 to 80% of the population with the vaccine, the COVID will stop circulating, and that's how we'll get out of this pandemic. But now we do know that even those who are vaccinated do get infected, they do pass on that infection. So what is our understanding now of herd immunity, and the focus still remains on vaccinating as fast as we can?
So the Delta variant has changed our understanding of herd immunity, because we know that vaccines that were developed against previous variants, while they're effective in preventing serious illness with Delta, they don't have the same level of protection against people getting infected and transmitting. So that means developing herd immunity through vaccination, even if we vaccinate 100% of the population, is unlikely. But that doesn't mean it doesn't help. It certainly reduces transmission, but herd immunity may not be reached, which means that vaccination alone might not get us to a point where if we lift all restrictions and mitigations, the virus won't start rising again. It probably will. And the answer to that is, while we wait for new vaccines to be developed that are more effective against Delta, we need to control new variants emerging, but we also need to mitigate. So we need to think about improving ventilation in indoor environments, in schools, in workplaces, in shops and businesses. We need to continue with our mask wearing, social distancing, and we need to think about vaccination alongside mitigation. Vaccination alone is not enough to contain the pandemic, although it's really, really important. This is a virus that's transmitted through the air, like cigarette smoke, and we need to use all the measures that would stop that, like ventilation masks. The more layers, the better we can control this.
No, absolutely. And, this example from England, it just proves that, because on one hand, you have very good vaccination rates over there, and, a significant proportion of your population is vaccinated. But at the same time, if you hold some, big music event with over 50,000 people, clearly that's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. The Delta variant is highly transmissible. We think that if this was spreading in a non-immune population, unvaccinated, not exposed to infection, one person could infect 6 people, and that's a lot. Because we have high levels of vaccination, that's reduced, but it's not reduced to the point that we can have large gatherings and hope they won't be spread. They will be spread, because crowded environments is exactly how this virus super spreads, when people socialize and meet each other without masks, without ventilation. So we can't forget about mitigations as we vaccinate, and we need to think public health is always a combination of things, and vaccines are part of it, but not the whole picture.
And what do we know about this variant? If you could just tell us a bit more, in a bit more detail, this C.1.2, the studies found it could be more infectious, that it could evade vaccines more, and a little bit about how these variants emerge as the virus circulates among the population. It just gets better and better at infecting us.
Well, so every virus randomly mutates as it transmits from a person to other and as it replicates. So most of the mutations will not have any impact on the virus, but obviously the mutations that allow a virus to transmit more over time increase in the population simply because they are better transmitted. Similarly, mutations that escape immune response or vaccine also become more dominant over time as more of the population is immune, because they just make the virus more fit. And that's what we see with all variants that emerge, that all of them develop the same sort of mutations, the ones that are associated with more transmissibility or better escape. The C.1.2 mutation was first detected in South Africa and is sort of a sublineage of the C.1, but it's quite diverged or different from the original strain of the virus. We don't know right now whether it's more transmissible or more able to escape, but we know that it has mutations that are common with alpha, beta, delta, and gamma. And we know that these mutations in other variants have been associated with higher transmission escape. I think the South African scientists are working on this urgently to determine whether this combination of mutations in C.1.2 will also have the same effect, whether it will be more resistant to antibodies or more transmissible. I think what they've noticed so far is that the frequency of the variant, although it's still very low, it was 2% in July, I think, has been slowly increasing in South Africa, which is obviously a concerning trend. But I think we will have to follow that closely to see if it does continue to increase and if we do find that it's more transmissible or more likely to escape.
And looking forward, if you can just tell us, does this mean that we'll have to just keep vaccinating and getting new vaccines to deal with the new variants, and till finally the virus becomes endemic perhaps in various countries?
I hope we won't have to do that. I mean, unfortunately, when I look at the global strategy on this, it looks like that's where we are headed to. But I think we need to remember a new variant emerging can massively change the trajectory of the pandemic. I mean, Delta massively changed this. Not only did it lead to mass death and infection in many parts of the world, including India, but it made attainment of herd immunity very difficult or impossible just with vaccines that were not directed towards it. So we cannot afford to have new variants emerging like this. So we have to actively prevent it by containing transmission. So it's not just focusing on deaths and hospitalizations. We need to actually reduce cases, which, as I said, we can't do through vaccines alone. So I think we need to sort of adopt a global elimination strategy where countries really try and get to zero COVID. And many countries have. Countries with the population density and even population of India have done this. But we need governments and politicians to understand that this is not a virus we can live with, because it keeps mutating and becoming more transmissible, more severe, and evading vaccines. So we have to prevent new variants emerging. And the only way to do that is changing the way we live with ventilation, masks, and vaccination, and global vaccine equity.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for joining us on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.